This morning, we wanted to start with just a quick overview of some of the direct marketing strategies that we came up with, but I also wanted to mention that we have a draft of our direct marketing guide. We've printed out some here for folks to look at. We've sent them to the remote locations in case anybody there wants to review them and provide us with feedback if we're missing anything or if there's a section that should be added. And so today's agenda, it tries to track the direct marketing guide and provide that information. And so following the workshop, we'll be making some changes and trying to get that finalized and out as well. And so the way that we approached direct marketing was selling directly to the customer, but there's lots of different customers and there's lots of different ways that we can do it. And one comment we get a lot in Sea Grant, especially working with seafood producers, is that there is often some angst and tension from processors about direct marketing, that it's kind of cutting the processors out of it. And through our research, not only here, but through conversations I've had across the country, there are a lot of seafood producers that are direct marketing, but they're working with custom processors. And so they're not doing their own processing. They're actually going out and having someone else flash freeze or get their product ready to be delivered to the customers, both for the easier it is to get some of the permitting requirements, but also they just don't want the hassle of having to process the product. And so the ones that we were going to cover today and talk about were things like farm stands, the U-Pick operations, farmers markets, food trucks, and then community-supported agriculture. And so Rusty Rumley from the National Agricultural Law Center was going to start by talking about on-farm sales, and then we were going to move off-farm, and then I was going to talk a little bit about community-supported agriculture and fisheries. So I'll turn things over to Rusty.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. Like I said, what they asked me to come and talk about today was to address issues with on-farm sales. I'm going to talk briefly about marketing and some of the issues that we see come up from the legal perspective. But then I'm going to talk a little bit about landowner liability, because when you're really dealing with the on-farm sales, this is kind of the sticky issue that people can get themselves in trouble with. So that's the two issues I'm going to address here briefly. A couple of things about the on-farm sales. One of them is they're a tremendous resource for developing a clientele. A lot of people have, on-dock sales or selling at farmers markets. Both of those are techniques where you can move product, but there's also been a growing interest across the country on showing people how that food is actually produced. I was working with an agritourism operation and get to see some school groups come in, and first group of kids come in and the farmer's showing them the dairy cow, and the kids start asking, well, okay, here's the dairy cow, where's the cow that produces the chocolate milk? And everybody thought it was cute, and we kind of chuckled, and that group finished up, and the next group came in, and lo and behold, same question comes up again. And after a while, it gets to the point where it's not quite so cute. It's kind of scary to think that the people are so disconnected from their food supply that they don't realize that there's no such thing as a chocolate milk cow. So the one thing that the on-farm sales can provide is you're not just selling your product, you're selling the experience. And you're also creating customer loyalty so that in the future when they think, I'd like some more fresh fish or I'd like some more oysters, they associate that with you and your brand. So just a couple of the big benefits when it comes to this direct marketing or on-farm sales. Something that's been really popular in the past couple of years is the development of agritourism. Whether it's an ongoing event or it's just a couple of short events that are held throughout the year, these are typically ways to get customers out there in large groups and let them experience your operation. Now, you may not have the type of operation where you want people out there on your farm every day. That's fine. There's plenty of people that do it. They might do one big event a year, and they'll invite people out there on that one day. They have porta potties set up. They got washing stations. People can come out and they see how you conduct business yourself, and they get to basically do a walk through the facilities. So just some ideas that you may have on ways to increase your customer base. Like I said, with the benefits, though, there comes potential liability issues. One is, by bringing out these people, you need to really plan out how you're going to do this. You may need permits to have these people out there. You need access to restroom facilities. You need to make sure that the premises that you're operating is safe for those people to come out and spend the day on your farm. And for a lot of people, the liability issues are something that they don't always think through well enough before they start inviting people out there. Liability issues are a big thing for farmers because farms are not the safest places to be. A lot of accidents can happen on farms. There's a lot of dangerous stuff out there, whether it's an aquaculture operation or a traditional farming operation. You've always got heavy equipment. You've got natural conditions in the land. You've got chemicals. There's all kinds of things out there that the person working around that stuff doesn't think about. You become acclimated to those risks and you deal with them on your own. You may teach your children, but for the people that are coming in, they have little to no experience in this type of operation, and they don't often realize what things can be dangerous and what things cannot be dangerous. Every farmer I know of has got an old boneyard out there full of old farm equipment. There's nothing more interesting to little children than a bunch of old farm equipment that's sitting out there rusting in the field. And lo and behold, they'll go out there and hurt themselves. And it's not something that the farmer may think of as a potential issue, but they can get themselves in a lot of trouble if they don't use a little bit of forethought. So with that being said, I'm going to talk about some of the liability issues, and one thing that may be a good tool for those, especially those that are working here in Alabama, and that's the Alabama Agritourism Statute. Before we can get into the Alabama Agritourism Statute, you got to have a little bit of a background because they don't do a great job explaining it in the statute itself. So, when we talk about liability issues, the first question you've always got to ask is, who are these people and why are they on my land? Did you know about these people? Did you invite these people? Are they paying you to be there? All of those questions end up being extremely important. The law basically divides people on the land into three categories. You got the trespasser, and everybody knows what a trespasser is. This is going to be the people that you owe the lowest duty of care to. The next group is the licensee. These are the social guests. People that are out there, they have permission, but they're not there for any business purpose. You've got a higher duty to them than you do to the trespasser, but not as much as you do for the business invitee. These are the people that you owe the highest duty of care to. And we're going to go through each of these, but just realize this is an ascending order. Lowest duty of care to the trespassers, highest duty of care to the invitees, or the business invitees. Like I said, everyone knows what a trespasser is. There's generally two types of trespassers. There's the ones you never know about, and the ones that you find evidence later on. And just because you don't know the name of the person doesn't necessarily mean that you don't know that there's a trespasser. Good example is, you've got the pond on the back 40. You don't know who's been out there fishing, but when you go out there and you see the tire tracks and the beer cans, you know somebody's been out there and you didn't give somebody permission. So the duty of care that you owe to trespassers is you have a duty of care not to affirmatively go out and harm them. That basically boils down to don't set booby traps. Now, a lot of people say, well, this isn't that big of an issue. No farmer would do this. Farmers do this all the time, and they get themselves into a lot of trouble. I don't know if you guys can read the screen. This is an ad I took off Craigslist about 1.5 years ago. It says, I need a mean bull. I'm hoping to find an aggressive bull that is protective of his field. I'm wanting a very aggressive one that will chase people off. Call me or text me. I'm not particular on the breed. This guy made two mistakes. First of all, he's setting a booby trap. And second of all, he's dumb enough to provide written evidence by posting it on the internet. And the guy wasn't successful in the first one because he posted a subsequent ad a couple of weeks later. So farmers do this all the time, especially when they're dealing with the trespasser. They want to set up some kind of nail strip to pop tires, or they want to hang fishing hooks at about eye level that people can stumble into. There's all kinds of things that people will do to try to protect their land, and I'm telling you right now, it is a very bad idea to engage in any of those habits. But that's basically your duty of care for trespassers. So long as you don't go out there and try to do anything to affirmatively harm them, you're going to be in pretty good shape. With the caveat of the young children. There's a doctrine called the attractive nuisance doctrine. For some children that are of tender years, there's some stuff out there that is just so attractive to them that they can't help themselves. And unfortunately, for a lot of people involved in agriculture, there's a lot of old stuff out there that's just unbelievably cool for young kids, such as the old farm equipment. They just can't help themselves. So we do have a duty when we're dealing with small children, but for the most part, most trespassers duty not to do affirmative harm. Licensees are the next groups. These are the people that go out there. These are the social guests on the property. This is inviting friends over for dinner, having someone come up and ask if they can hunt or fish on your property and you're not charging them. All of those would fall under this category. Like I said, and these duties, they build on each other. So first of all, you got a general duty not to cause harm. Fairly straightforward. But it goes beyond that. With the licensees, you've got another duty. And that duty is you need to warn them of any hidden dangers that they may not be able to discover on their own. So what do I mean by warn of hidden dangers? Someone shows up, they want to hunt, walk, use land without a fee. If they're going to be going fishing on the back 40, and you know that there's a bull back there, like that Craigslist ad, and that bull is going to charge people, you need to warn that person before they go back there, hey, watch out for the bull. It's pretty aggressive. But what about the pond? That person, they ask permission to go fishing on the back 40, and you say, sure. Do you need to warn them that water is dangerous, that there is a pond that they will be fishing in, and they might fall in and potentially drown? And the answer to that is probably not. I mean, a pond is something, it's an obvious feature on the property. They should be able to see it. So you probably are not going to have the duty to warn in that particular example. So it's the hidden dangers that need to be talked about. If you've got an operation and you know that there's been snakes in the area, you need to warn the people before they go on your land, hey, the snakes are really bad this year. Watch where you're stepping. Or we know there's been a lot of bees out there in the last couple of weeks. We've been trying to take care of them, but they're still out there. You need to watch where you're going. Watch for look and see if you have any bees. If you see some, let me know. And then the invitee. This is something that most people involved in agriculture or aquaculture typically don't see a lot of. These are people that are paying to be on the premises, or they're there for some type of business purpose. Generally speaking, most agricultural or aquaculture operations, they generally don't have a lot of these people out there. These are the people that come onto the land for your benefit. So they could be coming out there, they could be the customers coming to the farm stand, they could be the customers to the agritourism operation, but one group that most people don't think about is employees. Your employees are also there for a business purpose. They're there to make you money. If they're not making you money, you're probably not going to be keeping that employee around for very long. So you do have a heightened duty of care, not only to your customers, but for the people that are working for you as well. Other groups you should worry about, students and business people that are coming out. Maybe they're coming out to tour the operation to see if they want to go into business with you later on. But those people are also owed a heightened duty of care. Like I said, these duties of care, they build on each other. When we're talking about the business invitee, you have to use, and this is where law gets great, You have to use ordinary care to keep the premises reasonably safe for the benefit of the invitee. What does that mean? And the answer is, we really don't know. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. Looking back in hindsight, would another person in your shoes have done what you did? Were the actions that you took to protect that person reasonable? You don't have to go to extraordinary measures, but you have to do those type of things that are easy, they're reasonably foreseeable, things that you would do in the ordinary course of business. One of the things I always talk about with people, especially that they're looking at getting into any direct marketing business, I tell them to look into agritourism. What they may be doing on their farm may not be traditionally considered agritourism, but when it comes to resources out there for dealing with liability issues for people being on your land, there's not many resources that are better suited for this than there are in agritourism planning. The great thing about these agritourism resource lists is that they go out there and they will provide detailed checklists that people have put together over the years on things that you as a landowner should be doing to make sure that your premises are, quote, reasonably safe. And when I'm talking to groups, I always tell them, don't just look at your own state, look at the lists from the states surrounding. Agritourism is not that old of an industry. What happened in the beginning was states basically copied their lists of things that landowners should check for, and they all just put up basically the same list. As time went on and people got hurt in operations in the state, they added those things to their list. You know, whoa, a tree branch fell out and hit somebody here. Well, we're going to put in our checklist, go around and check the timber and make sure there's no dead limbs. So even though a lot of these lists are still 80 to 90% similar, there's some variations out there from the different lists. And one thing that you can do as a landowner is to go out there and incorporate multiple lists when you're doing your checklists. Nothing says I'm a reasonable, prudent landowner like being able to go into a court and say, well, I'm an Alabama producer. I use the Alabama agritourism checklist to make my premises reasonably safe. But not only did I use the Alabama list, I used the Mississippi list and the Arkansas list and the Louisiana list as well. And chances are there's only 5 or 6 things that are different that have been added to those other lists. But that just goes to show how reasonable and prudent you are by not just doing the bare minimum in your state, but going out there and looking at other states to get examples as well. That's something, that is a tool that your attorney would dearly love to have if something ever happened. Other issues things that can be really helpful. Marking the boundaries. Like I said, for many of these classifications of people, a lot of times the person may have permission or they may be paying to be on a piece of property, but you don't want them to have access to everything. You don't want them to have access to the chemical storage shed. You don't want them to have access to go out there and play with the heavy equipment. You may not want them to have access by themselves to go back out there to the ponds. So you need to mark boundaries carefully so that they know where they're allowed to go and where they're not allowed to go. And you need to be careful about maintaining them. If they stray outside the boundaries, they go from being an invitee to a trespasser because they did not have the right to be there. So make sure that you have those boundaries marked carefully. This picture here shows hay bales. One agritourism operator got the great idea, well, they needed to provide a barrier, so they were going to stack round bales up end to end to provide kind of a fence to keep people corralled into the areas that they wanted the agritourism participants to be in. Great idea, except they didn't think things through. There's nothing little kids like more than climbing on hay bales and jumping from hay bale to hay bale. So when you're employing these strategies, sometimes you got to put yourself in the shoes of a little kid and say, what could I get into? Or when I was that age, what would I have liked to have done? So use that to go out there and kind of base your strategies. Everyone's heard the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. When it comes to these liability issues, that statement rings truer than almost any other time. The steps that you can take in the beginning, making sure going out there and planning out things and making sure that the premises is reasonably safe, that's going to pay dividends in the future. One thing that I tell people, and that is, depending upon how meticulous the person is an inspection schedule. If you're one of those people that can go out there and you're good at writing things down and you make yourself do that same thing every day, an inspection schedule is a great thing to have. Once every month you've gone out and you've went through the equipment, you've walked through the property that the people are going to be on. There's no holes in the ground. There's no tree roots sticking up. There's no way for them to get into the equipment shed. You just got this checklist and you go through it and you're good at checking it off. That's a great tool to have and a great way, a great resource for your attorney if something adverse does happen in the future. There's some cons to this approach though. Some people get themselves in trouble if they set up this inspection schedule, but they're not necessarily motivated to keep it up. I'll give you a good example. Public restrooms. That sheet of paper that's on the back of the door. The cleaning schedule. If you go in there and you see the date is April 22nd, you're thinking, well, or April 21st, that's not too bad. But if you go in there and you see the last date that's wrote on the back of the bathroom door is January 4th, 2013 or 2014, it doesn't give you a very good sense or good feeling, does it? So these inspection schedules, if you're the type of person that will go and fill them out on a regular basis, these are great things to have. If you know you're not the type of person that can keep up with these lists, you may want to avoid them in the future. But for those people that do, that are good at keeping up with these types of things, keeping up with the paperwork, these are wonderful things to have that you can do to help ameliorate some of the potential risks. So now that I've kind of gone through those three classifications, the agritourism statute will make just a little bit more sense. About half the states out there, including the majority of the southern United States, have what's called agritourism statutes. Now the purpose for these statutes is it's to encourage farm owners, aquaculture operators, to open up their land, to open up their operations, and let people come out there and see how their food is produced. Now, the way these statutes are written is they protect against the inherent risks of agriculture or aquaculture. And that's basically talking about things like wild animals or defects in the land or in the surface conditions. So like things like potholes. This whole concept of premises liability for the invitee, it works really well for situations like a grocery store. It's very easy to keep a grocery store in a reasonably safe, losing the word there, but it's very easy to keep a grocery store reasonably safe. Make sure that the floors are cleaned up. If something spills onto the aisle, make sure you send somebody to clean it up. With a farming or an aquaculture operation, it's not always as easy to go out there and make everything reasonably safe. You can't go out there and fill every single pothole. You can't go out there and cover every single root that's exposed. You can't go out there and put fences around every single pond to make sure no child can fall into it. There's no way that you can go out there and make that premises 100% safe. So the purpose of these agritourism statutes is to kind of provide liability protection for these so-called inherent risks. And the way it does it is, it states the agritourism professional does not confer upon any participant the legal status of invitee or licensee. So basically what this law does is it turns them all into trespassers. And that's a group, remember, you had the lowest duty of care, i.e. don't go out there and cause a permanent harm, don't set booby traps. So these agritourism statutes are a great way to go out there. They're a great tool to go out there and help manage some of this potential risk. Alabama has a fairly broadly written statute. States like Arkansas, things like food stands don't count. are not included in the agritourism statute. Alabama is written broadly enough that you pick operations and even farmers markets are going to be covered by the agritourism statute. So it'll provide extend this liability protection. And it's important to realize this liability protection is not absolute. There are ways you can lose it. One of the most common ways is if you know of a specific problem. One of your hired hands came and told you that morning, hey, there's a big pothole over here by this pond. It probably should be filled. But then before you send someone over to fill it, somebody gets hurt. That's a potential area where liability can happen because there was a known defect and you did not go out there and correct it in a timely manner. So just realize that this is not a perfect protection, but it's a good protection to have. One of the other things it requires is the posting of warning signs. State of Alabama, like the other states that require this, they give you the exact language that you must have in the warning sign. Not only do they give you the exact language, they specify how the sign has to be written. So in Alabama, it has to be in black letters that are at least 1 inch tall. If they're 3/4 of an inch tall, the warning sign is not going to be valid. You need to follow the warning sign exactly. To do this, you should probably either look up the Alabama agritourism statute or you should work with a licensed attorney and they can tell you what are some of the other potential issues that your operation may have. Because, like it or not, your operation is going to be different than every other operation out there in the entire world. So you're going to have different risks associated with your operation that other people may not ever have. So something to keep in the back of your mind. And then finally, last but not least, I want to talk about zoning and siting. This is another area that people can potentially run afoul. And that is, before a lot of people that are involved in the direct marketing, or at least the ones that are very good at it, tend to be pretty creative people. They get big ideas, they'll get excited about those big ideas, and they want to implement them as quickly as possible. For a lot of people, I'd caution them, kind of hold back. The big idea is wonderful, but before you go out there and start implementing that next, latest, and greatest idea, you need to go out there and make sure that what you're doing is actually feasible. Check on things like, check with your local county zoning board and see if the actions that you're wanting to take are going to be permissible. If they are permissible, what steps are you going to have to take in order to accomplish what you're wanting to do? For some of these operations out there, they might want to have people out there 50 days of the year. But if they have people on premises 50 days of the year, they might be required to have a dedicated restroom facility that's handicap accessible. Maybe that's a bigger investment than you're willing to make. But if you talk to county zoning, they might say, well, if you're only going to have people out there for 5 or 10 days, we'll let you get away with porta potties. So realize that you need to work with the local county zoning authority to make sure that what you're doing is not only going to be appropriate, but a lot of times they'll be willing to work with you and point out areas, well, if you do this and this and this, it's going to require this level of work. But if you scale back on a couple of things, I think they can get you out of here fairly easily and pretty cheaply in the long run. So work with them, be flexible, maintain a good relationship with them. But it's just always check with them before you do anything. And like I said, it's difficult for a lot of people involved in the direct marketing because they tend to be fairly visionary. They get this big idea and they jump into it. And they don't get permission or check beforehand. And sometimes they can ruffle some feathers with local government officials. So be sure you go out there and talk to them before you do anything. The other person that you need to talk with before you do any big change is the insurance agent. And hopefully we'll have time to talk about that later, but 2 people that you always should be checking with before you do anything is local zoning and your insurance agent to make sure what you're doing is not going to cause any problems for you down the road. So with that being said, I'm going to end up and I'm going to turn it over to Tara, and Tara is going to be talking about issues that occur with off-farm sales.
Thank you, Rusty. Hi, everyone. Okay, so as Rusty said, I'm going to talk about off-farm sales briefly. So what's the big difference between on and off? On off-farm sales, you go to the customer. You take your product out into the world and sell it to them at different locations. Two of the most popular forms of this are farmers markets and food trucks. So we're going to talk a little bit about those two strategies. So first of all are farmers markets, and these can be at permanent or temporary locations. It might be a permanent location that a city has set aside that's open seasonally or throughout the year, or it could be just a market that pops up in a designated parking lot, maybe in the spring or through the summer. And usually they're open once or twice a week, and then you sell to individual customers. So when you enter into these, usually you just file an application with the individual market, and then you pay a daily fee. And then there are other permits and licenses that you have to consider when you join one of these. You have to get a seafood dealer's license from the DCNR. You also have to make sure that you're in compliance with local health department requirements. And in addition to that, you have to make sure that you are complying with the individual market requirements, which may deal with how you provide samples to your customer, how you display your products, you know, how signage, that type of thing. So I wanted to give you an example of one of those, and the Coastal Alabama Farmers and Fishermen's Market in Baldwin County is a great example. They just opened last October, and they have 30 spaces available for vendors to come in. They're open for several seasons throughout the year so far. Seems like they were open less often in the winter than, say, the spring or the fall seasons. And in addition to the state and local rules, as I mentioned, they have their own individual requirements. For example, if you wanted to sell oysters in the shell, you have to have those delivered by a certified processor. They also had some food sampling things, like you have to cut the samples on site. You can't do it beforehand and bring it to the market. So those are just things to consider as you're joining a market. And so the next thing I was going to talk about are food trucks. And food trucks are kind of a newer thing. You may have seen Top Chef. They always have a food truck competition that's kind of exciting. And this is when you prepare the food in the truck and sell it to in individual portions to your customers. And it typically costs less to operate than, obviously, a brick-and-mortar restaurant. But you do have additional permitting and licensing requirements you have to consider when you open one of these. You have a lot of freedom to move around, but with that freedom, when you move from city to city or county to county, the laws that apply to you, the food safety laws, may change. So you have to check with your local government before embarking on that. The other way to do it is to sell fresh or frozen seafood from a vehicle. With that, you have to add on a vehicle license to your seafood dealer's license. And we'll talk more about these requirements later in the afternoon session. And then again, there may be local requirements with those. So some things to keep in mind. Some positives are that it provides supplemental income. It's flexible. You have a lot of freedom. You can move around. And you also strengthen your connections with the community. It's also great advertisement for your product if you get out there and people can interact with you. Some disadvantages are that it's labor intensive. You have to travel to the locations. You might have additional packaging that you have to provide. And then, of course, the licensing and permitting requirements may change. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to talk about some hybrids for you.
Great, thanks. So this next group that I call, is my term to call them hybrids, because they often involve some on-farm sales and off-farm deliveries. And so community-supported agriculture has been around for a while. Most of you are probably very familiar with community-supported agriculture. And then recently, some community-supported fisheries have started to pop up around the country. There's about 30 right now, I think. And they're basically contractual arrangements between farmers, or in some cases fishermen, and the consumers. And so the CSA members buy shares of the farmer's harvest, usually distributed on a weekly basis during whatever the growing season is. Farmers may work with processors if they're trying to add things like meat to their share, or milk, like if they're actually having it processed, depending on what type of product they're selling. And they often use volunteers to either prepare the shares or to transport them to different locations for delivery. In addition to having community-supported fisheries, which are selling shares of a fisherman's harvest, there are a few examples of kind of combination community-supported agriculture and community-supported fisheries. For instance, there's a couple CSAs in Vermont that wanted to diversify the shares for their shareholders. And so a couple times during the season, they have an add-on for seafood, for lobsters, for instance. And so the lobster, you can have a delivery for a week of lobsters or some other seafood. And so it's really the CSAs trying to diversify the product and satisfy the demands of their shareholders. So I wanted to provide a couple examples of community-supported fisheries or agriculture or aquaculture that are out there. One is Seaville CSA. This is actually Charlottesville, North Carolina. It was started by a couple of graduate students, and it ran for a couple of years. I don't think this one operates anymore, but the fishermen, the aquaculture producers, the freshwater trout and catfish producers still do sell their product in a similar manner, but through farmers markets. So this was set up to support the Virginia Natural Fish Company, which was supplied by the Virginia Aqua Farmers Network. And so it was like a cooperative of the aquaculture producers in Virginia. And so they were selling shares of rainbow trout, catfish, shrimp, and prawns during the season. There haven't been any website updates since 2013, but the Virginia Natural Fish Company still has all their advertising about upcoming farmers markets and sales like that. My guess is that, without investigating, is that the grad students graduated and moved on, and there wasn't anyone to operate the CSF anymore, but it is an example of one that was done for freshwater aquaculture. Another one that has been pretty successful on the seafood side is Thimble Island Oyster Company, and this is in, I think they're in Massachusetts, one of the New England states. And so it's oyster aquaculture operation, a family-owned business, and for $175 per year, shareholders receive 1 dozen oysters and 2 dozen clams each month for 6 months starting in April. And they have pickup locations at the dock or in town. So there's a couple different deliveries for it, and they've been pretty successful. They also sell their oysters in a lot of different venues, and so this is just one supplemental way that they do it. So things to keep in mind, very similar to the other issues. That one thing that's nice about CSAs and CSFs is that it's a pre-harvest cash flow, so you get all your money from the shareholders at the beginning, which can help cover some of those upfront costs. It's access to a stable market. You know that you'll have those customers during the season, and again, strengthens the connections with the local community. The disadvantages, like most of direct marketing, it's a lot more labor intensive. You know, the farmer has to set up all those deliveries. There's a lot more that comes with the consumer expectations and demands. CSAs and CSFs have problems if some natural forces impact the harvest, and so you can't deliver what the customers were thinking of, or say a fishery gets shut down and then the catch is different. And then there's licensing and permitting requirements depending on where you're delivering. Several CSFs in California actually set up their delivery sites at processing facilities where the processors are kind of filleting and getting the fish ready for the customers, and so they've avoided having to get their own dealer's license. The other thing that, at least on the fishery side of the CSF, is a lot of the CSFs are run more in a nonprofit model that are accepting fish and seafood from a lot of different suppliers, and to get the diversity that they feel that the shareholders want. And so you either have maybe a community organization that decides to operate a CSF or a CSA, and they're pulling in from several different farmers, versus a farmer who is just selling the share of what they're producing. So there's lots of different models of how you might be able to do it. And in the direct marketing guide, we mentioned a site. There are a couple sites out there. Local Catch is one for CSF, but then there's lots of CSA sites out there to kind of provide more information on. And so here's the contact information. You'll be able to get it in a lot of the materials for today. And so that was kind of our overview of the different strategies that we were talking about in the guide and to today. And now I'm going to take a minute to switch to another presentation that talks about kind of marketing resources and branding. And so feel free to get up, move around, grab some snacks in the back if you want to. It'll take me a few seconds to get the slides changed. And if there's any questions from the remote location, it's a fine time to ask now too.
What designates an agritourism professional?
Can you repeat the question, Jeff?
All right, so one question I got was, do these signs work at other locations such as a university? And the answer is, you got to look at the statute, but a lot of universities do use these signs. And I'll give you a good example of one I know of, and that is, besides the agritourism statutes, there's also statutes called equine activity statutes, which are kind of the precursors to the agritourism statutes. And at the University of Arkansas, we've got a fairly robust horse program, and these signs are plastered all over the equine facility, all over the facility. So yeah, there's a lot of different groups that are using these. They don't just have to be private citizens that are posting these signs. One thing that is interesting for Alabama is, for most of the agritourism statutes, they specifically do not apply to things like farm stands or farmers markets. Alabama farmers markets are specifically included, so it's not just doesn't just cover on-farm; it also covers some of the off-farm risks. So Alabama's got a pretty good statute when it comes to direct marketing issues.
And thanks. And I wasn't sure, did I hear something from the remote location, or it may have just been us talking? Good. Okay, great. Well, thanks. Well, so for the last 15 minutes or so of the first presentation, just wanted to run through some of the marketing resources that are out there and available for aquaculture producers, whether they're engaged in their traditional marketing or if they're trying to move into direct marketing. And I wanted to introduce my co-presenter, Beth Walton, who's the Alabama Market Maker Outreach Coordinator. She's actually based at the coast in Mobile, and she's handling things at our remote location at the Shellfish Lab. But I'm very grateful for a lot of the help she provided, a lot of the slides, and has been helping to pull this information together. And so if there's questions specifically about some of the marketing aspects, and we may bring Beth in if we can at the end. Oh, okay, you did have a question? Okay, we're having a hard time hearing. Okay, go ahead.
In regards to the agritourism statute, what designates an agritourism professional?
Okay, Rusty's coming up to the microphone, so just hold on a second.
Question was, what makes someone an agritourism professional? And the answer is, it says so in the statute. It actually defines out who will be considered an agritourism professional in the Alabama agritourism statute. In fact, most of the agritourism statutes will go ahead and define who is going to be considered an agritourism professional. Just realize a lot of those lists, they're not all inclusive. They'll say, you know, here are some examples of what we consider to be an agritourism professional, but it's not going to cover everything. Just because agritourism, it changes so rapidly. As people get new ideas, they go into new ventures. I mean, things that people are doing today weren't even considered a couple of years ago. So part of that is, if somebody does unfortunately get sued, one of the first things that the lawyer is going to have to establish is they're going to have to show that that person meets the definition of an agritourism professional. And like I said, the best evidence of that is there. It's found in the statute. The citation is in the materials for the statute, or you can contact me and I'll send you a copy of the most recent version of the Alabama agritourism statute. Either way will work. It works perfectly fine.
And we can send out all the contact information for the speakers afterwards, because for any of the specific questions, if you're thinking about things on your farm or with your production, it'll be good to contact everyone directly. Any other questions? Great. Yeah, go ahead.
In regards to the seafood dealer's license, we've discussed this with DCNR on several occasions. I don't think it was ever clarified that those of us in West Alabama that grow marine shrimp are obligated to buy this license. And DCNR never did really answer our question. So I don't know if that's been clarified anywhere since then.
Yeah. Yes, Scott, did you? I think we're going to cover some of this afternoon, but Scott Bannon from the Department of Marine Resources is here.
Once again, I'm Scott Bannon with the Marine Resources Division. I'm the Chief of Enforcement there. And under that particular question, if it is an aquaculture site that is not in the saltwater jurisdiction, it's a pond in, I believe you said West Alabama, then that does not fall under the seafood license per se. If it was an aquaculture site in the saltwater jurisdiction, which is generally Mobile and Baldwin counties, not in a pond. So your ponds would not be included in the requirement for a seafood dealer's license.
Thanks. That's a great question. And some of this we know that these are some of the updates that we'll also put in the guide. We want to make a few more distinctions between the type of aquaculture, like shrimp aquaculture in saltwater versus freshwater ponds.